devastation in human rights, like in the Niger Delta, but I think that I have this feeling that a lot of people who are involved in economic and racial justice and human rights work, like people who work with people whose lives are a daily emergency. I think I had this idea that climate change was just like the one issue I didn't have to care about. It wasn't that I didn't think it was important, it just felt like a little too abstract, a little too far off, and I had this feeling that there were these big green groups that were really well funded, like a lot better funded than any of the groups that I was involved with, and that they were sort of taking care of climate change. That was my perception. And I wish them all the best in doing that. So I came to it kind of sideways, which was that I was actually doing some work around reparations for slavery and colonialism. I was writing a long article about what had happened to the reparations debate in this country. Because actually there was a wave of debate, very mainstream debate, about the need for a real reckoning of this kind, leading up to a conference that took place in Durban, South Africa in 2001. And that conference was a real breakthrough, where we started to talking about race, stopped talking about race in a way that was just sort of about diversity and representation, and more about paying debts. Some of that was financial payment, other forms of really reckoning with history. And there was this breakthrough conference in September 2001, and it ended on September the 10th of 2001. And so I did this piece for Harper's looking at what had happened to that debate. And I interviewed a lot of people. One person, Bill Fletcher, said to me, it was as if a giant delete button had been pressed, and you can imagine why. And so I was doing a follow-up story about the state of this debate. And it wasn't just in the US, it was a global debate. And I went to the follow-up conference in 2008. And I was taken aside by some people from Latin America, and they said, you know, we actually think that the best chance for there really being a redistribution of wealth from the global north to the global south is climate change. And we'd like to explain to you why. And so I was taken out to a Chinese restaurant by some climate scientists and some officials from Bolivia, from the Bolivian government, and they explained to me the concept of climate debt. And they explained to me that this crisis of climate change was incredibly unequal, inherently unequal, that the countries that had been emitting greenhouse gases for a couple hundred years were actually had created this crisis, whereas people in Bolivia had barely emitted any carbon, but were really on the front line. They were already seeing their glaciers disappear. And they said, you know, this is really quantifiable, right? Like we can show exactly how much carbon was emitted when. And we think that this is a great chance to right some really deep wrongs, because Bolivia was looted of silver and all kinds of wealth and just pillaged in all kinds of ways. And so I learned about this concept, and I thought it was really interesting. And so I came to the climate movement with an economic lens because of that. And also because I had covered Hurricane Katrina for the Shock Doctrine and seen how unequally climate impacts played out. And this would be really familiar to people here, right? You know, when there is a terrible, terrible disaster, everybody hurts, right? Everybody loses. It's hard for everybody, but it isn't equally hard for everybody, right? So in New Orleans, when Katrina hit, if you had a car, if you had some cash, you could get into your car, drive out of the city, check into a hotel, call your insurance company, and it still was terrible. And you still may have lost everything, but there was a horizon, right? And you weren't left with nothing. But if you needed there to be a functioning state, if you needed there to be an evacuation plan, if you needed there to be people ready to rescue you, you were left, you were absolutely abandoned. So there was all of these inequalities, and they followed racial fault lines, and then on top of that, you had the vilification. So what I found when I really started engaging in the climate movement, which was around 2009 at Copenhagen Summit, was when these sorts of issues are particularly around the redistribution of wealth, like just the inherent inequality that we know that 70% of emissions come from the 20% richest people on the planet, and 50% come from the 10 richest people. And yet the impacts impact the people who did the least, whether it's in the United States or whether it's outside the United States. So whenever I would, or anybody else would bring up the redistribution question, you were really treated as if you were just like, there was actually a headline in the Guardian, and the headline was, Naomi Klein, stop making my job harder. It was written by a young, fresh-faced, white climate activist who was just like, stop talking about reparations, climate is hard enough, why are you loading all of this other stuff? It's like way harder. So the biggest change that I see is that there's a generation of activists now, and I think really emblematic of this is the Sunrise Movement, which is so powerful here in Chico. Grew up learning about the importance of intersectional politics, read theorists like Kimberly Crenshaw, are not afraid of making those connections, see that the movement for Black Lives, the migrant rights movements are powerful movements and want to make alliances with them, and so aren't afraid of that holistic vision. I think the other big change is that I think that we now have a couple, like, I don't know how we measure generations anymore, but I think there are, like, everybody in their 20s and under, and even some, people in their early 30s, like, their whole adulthood was spent in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. So they understand that we are in a time of systems breakdown. And climate is one system that is breaking, like one expression of that system breakdown, the biggest, because we're all inside the climate, but there are all kinds of other systems that are breaking down too. And so there's an appetite for holistic change, which is why we're talking about a Green New Deal and not talking about a carbon tax, right? I think that the attitude of the sort of the inconvenient truth era climate movement was things are pretty much okay, except for this small problem that we're overheating the planet. So what's the sort of least we can do to fix that problem and maintain the status quo, which we're kind of happy with, right? I don't think, I think that was also an expression of sort of who was doing the diagnosis in terms of what was okay and what's not. But that's not the attitude. Our Dr. Roy talks about, she talks about the sort of middle class climate movement asks itself, how can we change without changing, right? Whereas I think we now have a couple of generations who are saying, this whole thing is busted. Look who's president. And they're excited about deep change. And they're excited about building those connections. And so that's a huge shift, and it has happened fast. Yeah.
Well, let's just stay there. So Greta recently scolded world leaders and told them that they need to abandon the fairy tale of endless economic growth. In your book, This Changes Everything, you argue very convincingly that we need to restructure our economic system to confront the climate crisis. That theme continues on to this book in your chapter on capitalism versus the climate. You want to talk a little bit about that and how you see that all playing out?
Yeah, so, just on a really right? We need to cutting our emissions very dramatically. This is the premise of the Green New Deal. It builds on that fateful Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report that came out almost exactly a year ago, October of last year, that told us that we really ought to try to keep warming levels below 1.5 degrees Celsius, seeing as, look at what we're already seeing, having warmed the planet by 1 degree Celsius. But if we are to do that, we would need to slash global emissions by 45% in just 12 years, that's now 11 years. So that speed of change, those kinds of deep emissions, there is not an economist in the world who can tell you how you lower emissions that deeply and still have economic growth of 2 to 3 to 4%, which is why we need other measures of progress. So that doesn't mean that no aspects of our economy can grow. It means that we need a more managed economy where we contract the parts of our economy that are high carbon and that are based on sort of disposable consumption. And we can identify those parts of our economy where we can afford abundance that are already low carbon. And we sort of pointed to that in the film. Like, we don't usually point out that care work, which is overwhelmingly done by women, overwhelmingly women of color, it's the most devalued work in our economy, doesn't burn a lot of carbon. And it would be pretty easy to design it so that it burned even less if we had good public transit, if we made sure that we had health care along those transit lines and so on. Art doesn't burn a lot of carbon, right? Access to nature doesn't have to burn a lot of carbon. And so we can have sort of what's sometimes called public luxury. We can have abundance in those areas, even as we have to contract in other areas. But the idea that we can just have an economy that just defines progress as growth, as we do now, I don't think is compatible. And it is something that I think we have to be quite wary of when we talk excitedly about the millions of great, well-paying jobs we're going to create in a Green New Deal. Wes Jackson, who's an amazing farmer, poet, theorist, friend of Wendell Berry, he said to me many years ago, well, how are you going to keep it from turning into carbon, right? Meaning, you pay people well, you give them good jobs. What's to stop them? Why wouldn't they just go and spend that money at Walmart? That's what we do, right? So, if we want to break those cycles of disposable consumption, we need to design for it. We have to look at, why are we addicted to disposable consumption? Maybe we work too much. Maybe we're all overstressed. Maybe we have shorter work weeks so that we have more time to do, to cook, to do things like that. How are we going to make sure it isn't women who do all of that stuff? And so on. But it's not going to just happen on its own, is the point. So we're talking about a much more mixed economy, a much more designed economy. I don't think that it probably should be called capitalism. I think
it doesn't sound like capitalism.
No, it's very different. Maybe it's democratic, eco-socialist feminism.
So, picked you up at the airport this morning, and we went to Paradise. It's the anniversary of the campfire is coming up. As you know, a good chunk of Paradise has moved here. We've talked about that. We've never factored in
to citizenship, not to whether you are. If we go down that road, then everything has to change, right? But if we live in a society where we're already triaging and saying, well, we're going to let these people die because they don't have health insurance, right? Then it's not that big a step to say, well, if they don't have papers, right? So it's really truth time. People call me hopeful. I don't know why. I'm trying to have some real talk here, I think things can be, I think that future that we showed in that film, like it's not an easy future. Like it's a lot of work, but there's beauty in it. And I think being able to hold on to our humanity as we face these shocks is something really worth fighting for. It really is. Think about how good it felt to help people. I think that's who we want to be. But we really have to fight to be those people. There's a lot of really powerful people who want us to be something else. But in my opinion, there is absolutely no way to stop this just by saying no. The truth is that these crises are coming from somewhere, including the fires, right? They're symptoms of a system in crisis, including climate change, also out of control development, also inequality. So our system is built to just deliver more of the same. And we're seeing private development, gated communities, more inequality as a result, right? People are making money right now from their insurance claims, from flipping real estate. People who already had less money have even less. Who have less money have even less. Are becoming homeless. So I don't think you can fight disaster capitalism just by calling it out. I think ultimately the only way you stop this is by putting forward your own vision for how we actually get out of crisis, how we get at the root causes, and build the kind of political power behind those plans that they're credible enough, that people believe in it, and they're saying we want this instead. So that's my advice. You need a Green New Deal for cheaper. In the sky and messed everything up.
I've actually pulled a bunch of them to the top because they all kind of wrestle with this same question about people of color, about indigenous people. And I guess I'd ask you in a slightly different way. I think this is the way that you would come forward. The Green New Deal intentionally harkens back to an earlier period of the New Deal. And in doing so, what are the comparisons and, I think importantly, what are the lessons learned?
So the original New Deal had many exclusions. It excluded many African American workers. It excluded domestic workers, overwhelmingly women, many African American women. It excluded agricultural workers. And there was also systemic discrimination in the way relief was allocated, particularly in the southern states, because this was Jim Crow era. And so I could go on and on about all the reasons why the original New Deal is a profoundly flawed metaphor for us to be using. The resolution is very explicit about not just not repeating those wrongs. This is the AOC Markey resolution, but actually righting those wrongs, like making reparations. And specifically, there's a lot of language about frontline communities, Black and Indigenous communities, immigrant communities that are on the front lines of extraction and dirty industries and bearing the toxic burden of our addiction to fossil fuel. So a core principle of climate justice is front lines first, right? That the frontline communities that got the worst deal under the extractive economy need to benefit first from the transition to the next economy, which means things like energy democracy, so owning and controlling their own renewable energy projects, keeping jobs and skills in their communities. But it also means something like, we alluded to this in the film, that, when you do something like have a new version of the Civilian Conservation Corps, and there's a lot of talk of that. In the original New Deal, there was this extraordinary program. It was one of the most popular programs, the Civilian Conservation Corps, that had hundreds of camps in forests across the United States where 2.3 billion trees were planted. Which is more than half the trees that were ever planted in the United States. And this is because there was a deforestation crisis, there was also the Dust Bowls, they were also doing work doing soil protection. What I think any conversation about a new version of a Civilian Conservation Corps should be led by Indigenous people. That it's Indigenous knowledge needs to inform what we mean by rehabilitating the land, or else we're going to be talking about monocrops, we're going to be repeating the same mistakes, and we're going to be engaging in the same in a kind of conservation work that again and again has dispossessed Indigenous people from their lands. So that's a big part of it. The reason why I still think the Green New Deal is a good name, despite all of this really